It's a Thursday night, and school night be damned, we're at a Southeast Portland club getting ready for a jazz show.
And don't forget, there's a huge dance floor. Okay, we're ready.
That's Meg Samples, one of the many DJs here tonight from OPB's sister station, KMHD Jazz Radio.
And it's so nice to see you in person. Thanks so much for supporting KMHD. It's really good.
Like OPB, KMHD is a nonprofit public radio station. A public jazz station. How cool is that? And many people in the crowd tonight are KMHD members.
This is really a community that you are a part of today. And community right now, I think, feels more important than it ever has. So make some noise for yourselves.
That's KMHD DJ Alex Newman. Program director and DJ Matt Flieger reminds us why we're here.
And I just want to say, 40 years of this radio station. 40 years. It's a big deal.
That's right. It's KMHD's 40th birthday.
Hi, my name's Paul Cheek. I've been a fan of KMHD for 40 years. I went to all the jazz festivals at the college back in the day, which was a blast. And I love the diversity of all the DJs and everything they play.
My name is Mark Borgeson. I'm actually a jazz piano player and a kind of a fusion jazz funk. So I love that KMHD has the no boundaries. You know, they're not the jazz police.
Paul and Mark have been part of the local jazz scene since the early days of the station. When you think of jazz music, maybe New Orleans or perhaps New York City come to mind. But Portland's been attracting jazz stars and fostering local jazz talent for practically a century. Just ask local jazz pianist Daryl Grant.
When I was living in New York City and contemplating a move to Portland, I would ask people, what's happening in Portland? Should I move? And the response I got uniformly is, oh, Portland's great. Portland's a jazz town.
From the Gert Boyle studio at OPB, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast about the place you call home. Today, we're taking the opportunity of KMHD's anniversary to look back at Portland's birth and evolution as a jazz town. It's a history that's just as much about the city, its residents, its neighborhoods, its growing pains, as it is about the music itself. After jazz was born in New Orleans in the 1890s, it spread north to cities like Chicago and New York, then to West Coast cities like LA and San Francisco. Its arrival to Portland came late, thanks to steamships that traveled up and down the West Coast in the 1920s.
And they were full of jazz music and gambling and, at the time, illegal liquor and prostitution. And so the jazz players would come to town and some would stay.
Jazz historian and KMHD host Lynn Darroch says in the early 40s, the most popular local jazz act was the Castle Jazz Band.
They were white guys led by banjo player Monty Ballou, and they played in that classic New Orleans style.
Jazz music is undeniably a Black art form, but Portland's jazz scene in its earliest days was largely white. That's partly because Portland's Black communities were still very small. Oregon's Constitution included a clause banning Black people from the state until voters repealed it in 1926. Portland had fewer than 2,000 Black residents before World War II. But the construction of the Bonneville Dam brought cheap hydropower, which brought new shipyards, and with them abundant new jobs. The war brought almost 200,000 new residents to the area. Some 20,000 of the new Portlanders were Black and lived either in the wartime housing development Vanport or the city's Albina neighborhood. And as former Albina resident Malcolm Slaughter says,
the shipyards gave opportunities to poor Black people to work and make good money. And when you got money, then you go out and listen to music.
But it was still legal at the time for venues and restaurants to discriminate against Black customers, and most in Portland did, as former Albina resident Gerald Caldwell remembers.
A friend of mine was, he's an older gentleman, was prison guard for German prisoners in Fort Vancouver. he'd have to bring them over to Portland to a restaurant to eat, the German prisoners to go in the restaurant and eat, and he couldn't.
After Vanport flooded in 1948, displaced Black residents were pushed into Albina by racist redlining policies that prevented them from living anywhere else. And as the neighborhood's population grew, a community of Black-owned businesses thrived. Residents remembered having everything they needed: stores, restaurants, cleaners, right there in the neighborhood. When new Black residents came to Albina, they brought their culture with them too. And part of that culture was jazz. And jazz-inspired dance music like big band swing, boogie woogie, and jump blues. Black-owned jazz clubs started opening up in North and Northeast Portland. In the mid-40s, the Dude Ranch on North Broadway brought major jazz artists to town, like Thelonious Monk. The club had a mural featuring Black cowboys and both Black and white waitresses wearing Western attire.
The Dude Ranch had slot machines. It pulled so many people that the business owners downtown got upset.
Around the corner on North Williams Avenue, there was the Frat Club, Lil Sandy's, Jackie's, and McClendon's Rhythm Room. Malcolm Slaughter's father, Ed Slaughter, owned a pool hall on North Williams that was known for its jukebox, the only jukebox in town that had bebop on it, the complex style of jazz popularized on the East Coast.
When the Black bands would come to Portland, they'd tell each other that there was East Coast jazz on the jukebox in my father's pool hall.
The growing jazz scene brought some of the genre's most famous players to Portland.
My mom and dad went to see Dizzy Gillespie, and during the break, Dizzy came down and sat at the table with my parents.
Other visitors included Duke Ellington and Wardell Gray. Famous Black musicians would get booked to play at the city's largest venues downtown, but would spend their free time across the river on Williams Avenue, where the music was fantastic, and they wouldn't be discriminated against.
Black musicians who worked downtown at McElroy's Ballroom, for example, couldn't go next door and get a cup of coffee, couldn't sit on the main floor of a theater, couldn't try on a suit. So there was a great deal of segregation, but it was not practiced in that neighborhood.
When traveling Black jazz musicians faced discrimination from hotels and had trouble finding lodging, families in the Albina neighborhood put them up at their houses. Thelonious Monk spent the night at Malcolm Slaughter's house once, and local singer and drummer Sweet Baby James Benton remembered when Louis Armstrong stayed in Albina.
I got a chance to meet him, because there was about 4 or 5 houses around Portland where those guys would stay. What we do is drive around the block and hope that we'd see some of these cats, you know what I'm saying? So Armstrong was on one to come out and hang with you for a bit. He's a sweet cat, he's sweet to the bone. What you saw was what Louis Armstrong was. He was real, man.
Another hot spot for local jazz? Benton's backyard, a few blocks off Williams Avenue.
This is an old garage. And about 5 of us got together and started building on it. Put carpet on the walls and the ceiling. The stage had to be, 20 by 20. 2 pianos.
Musicians would often come over after their shows for late-night jam sessions. Players would come through in waves, both night and day.
And it was great for me because I lived a half a block from him. I could go out the back door and run half a block, and I'd be right there at James's house.
That's iconic local jazz drummer Mel Brown. He and Sweet Baby James are 2 Portland artists who came up in what one local musician called the University of Williams Avenue. Brown got his start while he was still a student at Washington High School, when he talked his way into a rehearsal of the Walter Bridges Big Band, after the band's regular drummer, Bobby Ross, went to take a phone call.
Cleve Williams and Bobby Bradford said, "Hey, man, this little kid over here, he reads your music." And Walter's like, "What? Little kid, what do you know about this?" I said, "Well, I understand what's going on, and I know what the problem is." He looked at me like, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 14. He said, "Well, where is the problem?" I said, "The problem is the drummer's not playing the quarter note triplets right." And he looked at me like, "What?" "Okay, kid, show us something." He counted it off, and I nailed the tune. And when Bobby got back, Walter said, "No problems. I got a new drummer."
segregation and redlining had restricted most Black Portlanders to living in Albina, and yet the community and its jazz scene flourished. Pianist Daryl Grant said people made the best of their circumstances.
Would I go back to the Jim Crow days of racism? No. Were there ways that people adapted to those challenges and created amazing art? Absolutely.
These years, the 40s and 50s, are considered Portland's golden era of jazz, and Albina and Williams Avenue were at the center. But the thriving Black neighborhood was hit hard by what the city called urban renewal projects, starting in 1958.
A lot of the Williams Avenue nightclubs and housing that was there during the 40s and 50s was bulldozed and destroyed in order to make way for the freeway ramps, the freeway itself, and Memorial Coliseum.
The highway construction pushed out longtime residents, destroyed businesses, and bisected the neighborhood. Still, Albina persisted, and it continued to be home to a music scene that, in the 60s and 70s, expanded beyond jazz to include soul, funk, and R&B. The area was home to Black-owned venues like the Texas Playhouse, Upstairs Lounge, and Fred's Place. Nate Phillips played bass for the Portland band Pleasure, which blended jazz with soul and funk, and once shared the stage with acts like Earth, Wind & Fire. In the 70s, they played regularly at Albina's Upstairs Lounge, and Phillips remembered big-name artists like smooth jazz saxophonist Grover Washington coming through.
Every time he came to town, he would come up to the stage, pull out his horn, walk up on stage unannounced, and just start playing.
The Cotton Club was owned by Paul Knowles. His name is so closely associated with the neighborhood that he's earned the unofficial title of the mayor of Northeast Portland. The Cotton Club was known as the only club on the West Coast with wall-to-wall soul. It attracted major acts, like legendary jazz and R&B singer Etta James and Rat Pack superstar Sammy Davis Jr.
It was a place to see and be seen. People dressed up to come there. All the people underage wanted to come, so my job mostly was to try to keep the people 18, 19, and 20-year-olds out.
But even the Cotton Club wouldn't last in the changing neighborhood. It closed in 1970. Not long after, Portland's Urban Development Agency destroyed the homes of 171 families to make room for an expansion of Emmanuel Hospital that never happened. It came only a decade after the destruction wrought by the construction of Interstate 5. Calvin Walker is a veteran Portland jazz musician who grew up in Albina and got his start playing at the Cotton Club when he was barely a teenager. Today, he works with the Albina Music Trust, which aims to restore the neighborhood's historic musical culture. He said, over time, projects like the freeway construction and botched hospital expansion devastated Albina and effectively killed its music scene.
And nobody was thinking about it. Nobody was going, if we put a freeway through here, it might disturb the Black community. They could care less. It's progress. And anybody that gets displaced is just too bad. And that was a basic attitude.
It was this environment and this state of the local jazz scene that Mel Brown found when he returned to his hometown in the 1970s. A career playing drums for major Motown acts like the Temptations, the Supremes, and the Four Tops had taken him to New York City.
I took a look at it and I was thinking, God, I just moved back from New York, and there's every corner there's a club, there's music. But Portland was just, everybody had moved out to Beaverton or Tiger, and the downtown area had nothing. So I was thinking, maybe I should go back to New York. My mom said, well, no, you don't run from a problem, you solve the problem. I said, okay, bingo.
Brown started playing at the remaining jazz clubs around town, forming new groups and encouraging other musicians to play downtown. For years, he played weekly at Jimmy Mac's, the city's go-to spot for live jazz for 20 years before its closure in 2016. Today, he performs with his B3 Oregon group at the Jack London Review, a jazz club in the basement of the historic Rialto Pool Room. With the influence and mentorship of longtime Portland musicians like Mel Brown, Calvin Walker, and sweet baby James Benton, a local jazz scene that had nearly vanished slowly recovered. It also expanded beyond the boundaries of traditional jazz, as jazz fusion integrated the sounds of soul, R&B, funk, and more. Today, the city once again attracts world-renowned contemporary jazz artists to town and has produced some of its own, like Grammy winner Esperanza Spalding. It's home to several long-running jazz festivals. As a Portlander, I feel like I could go find a local jazz show to go to almost any night of the week. And of course, it's home to KMHD Jazz Radio, which has embraced the ethos of jazz without boundaries with its eclectic programming and team of DJs.
You know, I never know what to expect, except for on Friday nights when I got the boomer.
The boomer, baby, in the house. Love the boomer.
Coming up after a break, we'll get to know a DJ who's been with the station for nearly 2 decades, host of the Soulful Strut, the Baby Boomer. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you dig what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll put a little bebop in your step every Monday morning. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPBphoto. And follow KMHD too. They're at KMHD_jazz_radio. Their Instagram account is awesome. And remember, this episode about Portland's history as a jazz town and all the great reporting and storytelling you hear on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. You can support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And it'll help support KMHD too. And now, back to jazz. Okay, I know this podcast came out on a Monday morning, but imagine with me for a second that it's Friday and the last remaining minutes before the clock strikes 5.
We're getting up here to the top of the hour, and you know what we do. And if you do, hold on to something. And until then, let's groove.
These dulcet tones belong to Portlander Ted Smith, otherwise known to KMHD listeners as the Baby Boomer.
I was sitting downstairs. I was sitting in my room, and I don't know what it is, but suddenly quitting time hit me.
Quitting time? Who says it's quitting time? I said it's quitting time. I was the foreman. Quitting time! Quitting time! I mean, I'm not a fan of Gone with the Wind, but there's so many funny things that happened in there. And I remember as a kid seeing that scene and just laughing. And then another thing was, I was in a mood. The Flintstones hit me. And I said, hey, yabba dabba doo. And I went into the studio and I said, I'm going to try this. And that was it. It started. And the OJs, Living for the Weekend. It just has that, it has a sound. It talks about living for the weekend.
It's Friday. Thank God it's Friday. And I just got paid.
It's tradition. Every Friday, halfway through his KMHD show, The Soulful Strut, Smith honors a time of the week I think we can all enjoy. The close of the Friday workday, quitting time.
All right, my people of Portland, yes, indeed. We're hitting that 5 o'clock hour. It's time for us to get up and get out of there. It's time for us to soulfully strut out that door. It is time for us to shake the shackles of the man off our backs. The weekend is upon us. You're listening to Soulful Strut. I'm the Baby Boomer. I got the sounds to get us where we got to go, because it is now time for us to get up and go. So do it. It is gorgeous.
I can't tell you how good it makes me feel to listen to this on Fridays. I'll put it on my commute home, and if it's a sunny day, I might roll down my window, rest my elbow, and breathe in a breath of fresh air. As a kid, Smith's parents had him listening to the greats. Ella Fitzgerald.
They told me that Ella Fitzgerald was the greatest singer ever was.
Duke Ellington, and his favorite, Count Basie.
And I remember having a transistor radio, and I had it underneath my pillow. I listened to it all night long.
He discovered his love for being on the other end of the radio signal as a teenager at Westchester Community College in New York State, which had its own radio station.
Somehow I got into it, saw them there, and they said, would you like to do a show? And that was it, and I was hooked. It was just like talking to everybody without seeing them.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Smith moved to Portland around 1990 from Alaska. He was still listening to jazz and eventually learned about KMHD. He happened to meet someone with the station out at a show. The opportunity came up to volunteer as a host, and the rest is history. His first show was on Mondays. He came on after one of his idols, Dick Bogle, a pioneering local Black TV journalist and city commissioner, who also volunteered as a KMHD host.
So I was nervous as can be, and I distinctly remember asking, what should I do, what should I play? And he said to me straight out, he said, I don't care as long as it swings. And I said, okay then.
Over the years, he's become a beloved fixture on KMHD and a seasoned Portlander who's watched the city and its music scene evolve for over 30 years. I sat down with him recently, right down the hall from KMHD in OPB's Gert Boyle studio. I asked him what he remembered playing on his show when he first got started on KMHD.
Well, I had to have a theme song, because that's what I thought. I got to have some sort of theme song. My theme song then was I Needs to Be Beat With by Count Basie. And that was on every now and then. I play it just to reminisce, and a lot of it because I really love Count Basie, and plus it was done in the '70s, and it had a swing, and it made Dick Bogle smile. So I said, oh yeah, I got this. And then to me music, I always like I'm connecting jazz with it generationally. Because, one never happened of the others. And I love that sound of I call them the granddaddies, the originals, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald. And I loved it. I played that. And then I love the new people that we're playing now. Andy Stokes, brother can sing. LaRonda Steele. Oh, my goodness. LaRonda Steele and Andy Stokes did Me and Mrs. Jones in band, and it's recorded, and it is, to me, it is the best. I love it, and I love every version of it, but they knocked it.
Me and Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jones. Hey. Got a thing going on, yeah.
These are the local people who who connected it and picked it and brought it to modern sound, and it sounds authentic, is what I was trying to say. And Shirley Nanette, let me tell you, I do that, and I would and to me, and Mel Brown was like, to me, one of the coolest people on the planet. When I get to see him, I walk by him just to sort of absorb some of that coolness. I do. Everything he does he's cool.
KMHD's motto is Jazz Without Boundaries. How do you think of that as a concept as someone who has a show on KMHD, which is a jazz station?
Well, I liked the phrase. I watched the transition because there was a lot of resistance to, you have traditional jazz. There's a lot of resistance to new inventions, trying new things. And there was a time where there was a definite, this is it, this is what jazz is. But to me, jazz was more than what they were saying. For me, like I said, I grew up with my parents who listened to it, and they knew it and told me this is black music. So whether it was Ella Fitzgerald, Sammy Davis Jr., James Brown, it was on the station. They played everything from gospel to jazz. Because at that time, remember the 60s, we were a segregated country. And so they played black music. You know, the first time I heard Leontine Price, an opera singer, and it was all played together and curated together so that it was just that this was our sound. That's what I try to do with mine, is I put in jazz, I put in soul, I want to get the people to understand the flavor that jazz is just not one sound. That's what I like about the other shows I listen to. I have it on all the time, is because the ear is so good. The sound, and it's vast. I'm learning. I'm listening to it. I'm learning new artists, people trying new things.
How did that feel for you as someone with a show on KMHD to see the station go from all right, we're playing traditional jazz to shift in that way to where it's a whole lot bigger?
Freedom. I liked it. I still do.
What are some of your favorite songs to play on the Soulful Strut?
Oh my goodness. I do love the Crusaders. Buck and Stomp Dance. Flight Time, because it does so well. Because when you're getting off the Flight Time with Donald Byrd, that plane taking off, it just fits so well. We got Curtis Mayfield. I'll play, the OJs, along with Dr. Lonnie Smith. You can't forget it's jazz as well. And so I play a lot of the soul jazz. I play Les McCann, Eddie Harris, Bobby Humphrey, Roy Ayers. Sarah Vaughan does Inner City Blues.
Make you wanna holler the way they do my life. Make you wanna holler the way they do my life. This ain't living. No, baby.
A Marvin Gaye cut. I'll play that probably too much.
I feel like I've heard it before. And I've definitely heard the Crusaders before on your show, and it is always a blessing. I'm like, someone was thinking of me over at KMHD, so thank you.
You got it. We got to stick together.
I also love whenever you play Stevie Wonder. I feel like...
I love me some Stevie.
Do you have any favorite songs to play on the show by him?
Love is in Need of Love. I really like that cut. Probably played that one much too much. And he is the eighth wonder of the world. That's why. That's just me.
That love in need of love today. Don't delay. Send yours in right away.
In my years as a radio person for a long time and now as a podcast person, I'm constantly thinking about our audience and what I can share with them as the person talking to them, what I can provide for them. What do you hope you can give your audience, you can provide your audience as a radio DJ?
I guess connection. It's one. That we can have this one thing that we all have, music. We like the sound, we like music. Doesn't matter who we are, what we are. Some days it's rainy, and you can feel it like everybody's feeling. We're looking at each other like, oh, it's raining on us. And some days it's sunny. you can, and even the things with politics, just all those things, you can sort of feel it because we're emotional, and you can pick it up, and that's what I try to pick up, and I guess maybe that's one reason I like to commute, is that I like to feel what it sounds weird, but I like to feel what Portland feels like, and that's what I try to do. I want to connect so that when you're getting off at 5 o'clock, and that time you're done. It's your time now. You can go. You did what you had to do. Now, and that very beginning when you realize that is so cool. When you realize that, oh yeah, I'm glad that everyone's liked it, and I feel blessed that I'm connecting with. I'm blessed that I'm in Portland. I don't imagine myself doing anything else.
I feel like Portland's jazz scene in particular is very resilient. We heard earlier about how Albina, which was the heart of the city's jazz scene in its golden era and home to a lot of Black-owned jazz and soul clubs, was affected through the years by a number of things, by the construction of interstate, by urban renewal, by gentrification. And yet, as a resident right now, from my perspective, Portland as a jazz city seems so vibrant to me. I could go out and see a jazz show in this city any night of the week easily. What do you see when you look at the local jazz scene today?
Just that. I mean, it's not going to go away. I mean, you can change borders. You can redline. You can regentrify. But the sound of the sound, the jazz is, I don't want to sound too hokey, but jazz is the sound of people. So wherever they go, there's going to be jazz. You cannot, it doesn't matter where I move to, jazz is going to come with me. So the music comes with us. So no matter what it is, you can move us from the east side to the west side. The music's going to come with us. It's still alive. It's still going to keep growing. Doesn't matter the size of Portland. No matter if Portland succeeds from the Union, it's still got to be the music. It's going to be there. It's with us, and I like that. And I'm proud and like to say that jazz is Black music, and I say that because it comes from a people different than us. We were enslaved, and music comes with you. And with that sound that came here in this new world, it has touched every single thing. It has gone global. And that is amazing when you think where its roots come from. And I find amazing that people we don't see. We've been in the New World since 1619, and we're talking that there isn't a place on the planet where they ain't going to hear that sound. I'm proud of that and scared of it at the same time. But I want people to understand that that's where it comes from. Not that anyone can't play it. It's played globally. But that sound comes from roots. It comes from people who were resilient, who suffered, who persevered. That's where it comes from. That's what that core, that backbeat, that's what it's about. It's the heart. We are going to continue on. And to me, that is what that music is. That's why it's going to stay. That's why it's going to be here. It's who we are.
That was Ted Smith, also known as the Baby Boomer. You can listen to his KMHD show, The Soulful Strut, Fridays from 4 to 6 p.m. on 89.1 FM in Portland or online at kmhd.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Join us next week as we revisit our very first episode, a reflection on how we all define home and what it means to feel at home here in the Pacific Northwest. I produced this episode, and our technical director and the host of KMHD's The Drop Shop on Saturday nights at 10 is Stephen Cray. Nalene Silva engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Julie Sabatier, Mia Estrada, and Sage Van Wing. You heard interviews from the Oregon Experience documentary Jazztown that were done by Eric Kane, Greg Bond, Nicholas Fisher, Michael Ben Dixon, and Tom Schreider. Additional interviews you heard were done by Jared Walker, Paul Marshall, Isabel Zacharias, Kaylee Domzalski, Arya Soroy-Joyo, and yours truly. This episode includes original music from Jazztown, written by Daryl Grant and performed by Grant, Andre St. James, Chris Brown, Derek Sims, and David Evans. You also heard the songs Livin' for the Weekend by the OJs, I Needs to Be Bead With by Count Basie, Stomp and Buck Dance by the Crusaders, Flight Time by Donald Byrd, Inner City Blues performed by Sarah Vaughan, Love's in Need of Love Today by Stevie Wonder, and Me and Mrs. Jones, performed by LaRonda Steele, Andy Stokes, and King Louie's Blues Review, recorded live at Riverhouse Jazz. Other music in this episode is from Audio Network. And hey, if you have a question for us, please reach out. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.
What's up, y'all? This is Questlove of the legendary Roots Crew and also The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And right about now, you're listening to the super heavy funk on the Drop Shop with my man, Stephen Vaughn Cray. All right? All right.